Good evening. Thank you all for coming. I am pleased to welcome Tim Campbell here. He is a NASA Solar System Ambassador to talk to us about the eclipse on April 8th. You are all welcome back here on April 8th. The eclipse is at 3:15 p.m., so we will be having light refreshments and activities here as well. So thanks so much for coming, and help me welcome Tim.
All right, thank you. All right, so thank you. Yeah, so as mentioned, so my name is Tim Campbell. I am one of about, it's a little over 1,000. I think it's around 1,100 now, solar system ambassadors. The Solar System Ambassador Program is run through the Jet Propulsion Laboratories and Caltech, California Institute of Technology. I like to say we are your tax dollars really at work, because NASA convinces all of us solar system ambassadors to do this without sending us a paycheck. So, but what they do, so we're all volunteers, but what they do is they send us lots of goodies. So before you leave, there's a table of all kinds of handouts that you can check out here on the table and take what you need. And I think there are Eclipse glasses, which may be hard to find these days. So at the end of the presentation, you might want to make sure you grab a pair of those. All right. So just a little bit of my background. So I'm a solar system ambassador, of course. Currently, I mentioned that. I'm also the president of something called the Great Lakes Association of Astronomy Clubs. So all the astronomy clubs, mostly in southeastern Michigan, band together and we put on events. The most notable one that we put on is something called Astronomy at the Beach. That's at Island Lake every September, where all the astronomy clubs and all the astronomers bring out telescopes. This is a star party by the astronomers, but instead of being for the astronomers, it's actually by the astronomers for the public. So you bring your kids and everybody gets to look through great big telescopes. Some of these telescopes are massive, they're great fun. And there's also presentations that we do. This year, however, you'll have to watch our website. Island Lake is under construction and they're redoing the only entrance in and out of the park, so we have to be in a different park. So we have two park options. We'll have to figure out which one we're in. So I can't tell you where we're going to be. The third thing that I do is I'm a planetarian. You're thinking, what's a planetarian? Planetarians do planetarium shows. So at Henry Ford College, I'm a planetarium operator presenter. So I do tours of the night sky and talk about all sorts of cool science geeky stuff. And I'm a past president of the Ford Amateur Astronomy Club, which is one of the Ford recreation. You can join the softball team, the golf team. Well, you can join the astronomy club, but as it turns out, you don't have to work for Ford to join this club. Anybody can join the club. So I'm also part of the club. So you can see I'm a bit of a science geek from the slide. So I'll show you the eclipses. This is 2023 and 2024. And if I show you here, this path along here, this is the eclipse path for the annular eclipse that happened last fall. This path here is the eclipse that's coming up on April 8th. The difference between these two eclipses is this was an annular eclipse, which means that you don't actually get to see totality when you do an annular eclipse. I'll give you examples of what that means later. But this one will be a total solar eclipse, and it's actually a pretty good one. So you will actually see the solar corona. There's all sorts of amazing things. But I do warn people, from Michigan, from here, you will get about 99.5% of the sun will be blocked by the moon. But we are not technically in the path of totality. So if I go to the next slide here, there's this little corner of the state of Michigan. So many people want to stand on that corner of Michigan. I'm pretty sure it's going to break off and sink to the bottom of Lake Erie. But if it doesn't, you would be in totality if you could get to that spot. But anywhere between these two yellow lines, you will see totality. This blue line, that's the center line for the eclipse. So you get the longest duration if you're on the center line, just shy of 4 minutes if you can make it to that point. But I do want to mention that if you don't make it to totality, this is like wanting to take the family to Disney World. You pile everyone in the car, you drive all the way down to Disney World, you get into the parking lot, you can see the Magic Castle, Cinderella's castle off in the distance beyond the entrance to the park, and you go, see kids, there's Disneyland, you've seen it, let's go home. All the fun happens inside the park. And for solar eclipses that are total, all the fun happens inside the path of totality. So there's a lot of eclipse phenomena that I'll talk about that if you are just outside, I don't care if you're 1 mile outside, you won't see any of those things. You have to be inside to see them. So I'll get into that a little bit. So why do eclipses happen? Well, the simple answer is the eclipses happen when the sun gets between the moon gets between the Earth and the sun. You would think that happens every month, but it turns out it doesn't, and you'll understand why by the time this talk is over. But the reason that we get eclipses the way we see them here on Earth, completely unique in the solar system. If you're on any other planet, you wouldn't experience this, and that's because of the size of our moon. So the size of our moon happens to be about 1/4 of the size of the Earth, but it's about 1/400th of the size of the sun, the diameter, not the volume. The diameter is about 1/400th. By striking coincidence, the moon is about 1/400th of the distance to the sun. So the sun is 400 times wider and it's 400 times farther away. And that means that from our optical perception, they appear to be about the same size, which is only about 1/2 a degree from edge to edge in the sky. And so due to that coincidence, we can see total solar eclipses. In the distant past, we had lots and lots of total solar eclipses. We did not have annular eclipses ever. In the distant future, distant being only about 600,000 years, when you have a planet that's billions of years old, 600,000 years isn't really a very long time, but in about 600,000 years, we will never have total solar eclipses on Earth ever again. And that's because each year, with the moon going around, the moon moves about 3 centimeters farther away from Earth each year. And after about 600,000 of these years, it will be just barely beyond the range where the relative size of the moon will not actually ever be big enough to completely block the sun for totality. So every eclipse will be a partial eclipse or an annular eclipse after that point. Okay, so let's talk about lunar months. And for this, we'll do some audience participation. What do you suppose would be the definition of a month for the moon? If we say it's been a lunar month, what does that mean? What happened in a lunar month?
28 days.
What's that?
28 days.
Okay, 28 days. Any other?
Go through all the phases.
All the phases, okay. So like new moon, first quarter, full moon, last quarter, and then new moon again. Any other, anybody want to throw out any other definition? There's one more that I usually hear. Nobody's mentioned it yet. All right, I won't keep you going. All right, so it turns out a lot of people think, well, a month is the amount of time that it takes the moon to go, 1 lap all the way around the Earth, right? So if I complete a lap around the Earth, that's a lunar month. And it seems like a reasonable definition. It turns out that is one of many definitions of a lunar month. There's a lot of ways to measure a lunar month, and they all come up with different numbers, by the way. So this one happens to be 27.3 days to go all the way around. This word sidereal that you see here, sidereal is from the Greek sidero. Sidero is iron. And you're thinking, why would it be iron? Well, think about it. So you live thousands and thousands of years ago. Somebody sees a falling star, which is we know today is a meteorite, right? But they're like, oh, there's a falling star, a shooting star, shoots across the sky. They chase it down, they find it, and the lump that they find laying on the ground is largely made out of iron. Conclusion, stars are made out of iron. And so anything to do with the stars were called sidereal, meaning of the stars, because they figured stars are made out of iron, and that was the word for iron. So now you know a little bit about how we came up with that word. So sidereal period, what we mean when we say of the stars, meaning if you were on the Earth looking out in space, there's some star, some constellation out here, and the moon happens to be right smack in front of one of those stars, and you waited for the moon to get in front of it ahead, the very same star, how long would it take? And that would be 27.3 days. There is a bit of a problem, though. Every calendar does, somebody mentioned new moon, first quarter, full moon, right? You see it on the calendar, right? So So we call that a lunar month. In fact, most people, when they say lunar month, that's what they mean, is that going all the way around once with all of the phases. Well, it turns out you get about 12 lunar months in a year by that measure. And that means that the Earth has moved about 1/12 of the way around the sun. So if the sun used to be there, and I've moved over here, now the sun isn't there anymore, now it's over here. So I actually have to go all the way around and then some. And so this 29.5 days, this is more like one complete lap around the Earth plus roughly another 12 to get to that point. So it's actually more than a full lap around, but the technical jargon is synodic month. It's the month that most of you think of as a lunar month. It's the month that they plaster on every calendar when they put those days on the calendar for you. So there's the synodic period, right? So I've got a new moon, I've got a full moon, I've got another new moon. From new moon to new moon, that's a synodic month. All right. So I mentioned this already, right? So we are orbiting the sun. And so if the sun used to be there, when a month goes by, now the Earth is up here. It's no longer in that direction, now it's in this direction. Okay, there are more of these. So there's another one called the anomalistic month. This one has to do with, oh, I didn't mention this. One type of solar eclipse that you can get is called the annular eclipse, and the other one is the total solar eclipse. I did mention that, but I didn't mention why. So the reason that this happens is the moon's orbit is actually not a perfect circle. So if I do the build here, oh, it's in that mode. There we go. It's not a perfect circle. It's ever so slightly elliptical. In fact, all orbits are ellipses. There are no orbits that are perfect circles. If you could magically create an orbit that was a perfect circle, I mean just bang on accurate perfection, it would not be very long before that orbit turned itself into an ellipse. And the reason is that in a two-body orbit system where there's only two bodies, whatever the shape is will be maintained essentially forever. But when you have more than two bodies, the gravitational tug of all the other bodies starts disturbing things. And it will very quickly go from a circular orbit into an elliptical orbit. And so that happens with everything. And you'll really never get it back to a circle again. So our moon's orbit is not a perfect circle. And it turns out, I'll give you some terminology here. Tap these in. So where the moon is closest to Earth, we call that the perigee. And where it's farthest from Earth, we call that the apogee. And you've seen this in the media. Where they say, oh, it's September. There's going to be a supermoon in September. Astronomers don't actually use terminology like supermoon. Astronomers would just say it's a perigee moon, and if the perigee moon happens to occur when it's a full moon, we just call it a perigee full moon. But in the media, you will see that referred to as a supermoon. Now, the difference between the closest point to the farthest point is maybe just a touch more than 10%. And so in the words of Neil deGrasse Tyson, if you ordered a 10-inch pizza, because you wanted pizza, and as soon as the pizza gets delivered to the house, you open the box, grab your measuring tape, check that pizza to make sure you got your 10-inch pizza, and what you discover is it's actually an 11-inch pizza. And you think that's super. There's your supermoon. So, here's me. Here is super me. Hard to recognize me without the cape, I know, but that's what we mean when we say it's a supermoon. All right. So when you are at the close point, the moon is closer. Because it's closer, it seems a little bigger, right? Things get smaller. They appear smaller as they get farther away. They're not actually smaller, but they seem smaller. And so when it's closer, it will seem a little bigger. And when it seems a little bigger, it's actually big enough to completely block the disk of the sun, if you're at the right spot on the Earth. If it is on the farthest point, it is not big enough to completely block the disk of the sun. And so you get this, they call it a ring of fire, whereas the moon moves in front of the sun, it can't completely block it. And so a little bit of sunlight peeks out all the way around the moon, and you get this ring effect that they refer to as the Ring of Fire. That's called an annular solar eclipse. Getting a little bit technical here, if you draw an imaginary line from the point of apogee to the point of perigee, they call that the line of apsides in astronomy. Technically, for anybody, not just the Earth, this point is called the periapsis, and this point is called the apoapsis. But it gets a special name because it's the Earth, and so they put G on the end, meaning geo, for our planet. And so they, instead of periapsis, they call it perigee. And instead of apoapsis, they call it apogee. By the way, if it's the sun, they call it perihelion when you're closest to the sun. And when you're farthest from the sun, they call it the aphelion. Helios being the name of the Greek god of the sun, Helios. And so that's where they come up with the Helion thing. All right. So the anomalistic month is going from perigee to perigee. And that's 27 and a half days. So for this next eclipse, I've circled the spot here. So this is the cycle of the moon. These are distances, right? So this isn't going to 0. This is only going down to 350 if it were at the bottom. This is in kilometers, so 350,000 kilometers. So the closest that the moon made it in January was about 362,000 kilometers away. And the little black dot signifies that that's where the moon was at that distance when we had the new moon. And the little circle signifies that's where the moon was when we had the full moon. So you can see the moon getting closer, farther, closer, farther, closer, farther. Well, here's our eclipse on April 8th. So you can see the black dot for the new moon. You can only have a solar eclipse at a new moon. And so there's our black dot there. And you can see it's about as close as it can get in that particular cycle. But also notice that not every cycle is the same. Some perigees are closer than other perigees, and some apogees are farther than other apogees. They're not all the same. That has to do, remember I said, even if you could make a perfectly circle orbit, it would very quickly become non-circular. This is due to the perturbations of other orbiting bodies in the solar system, but mostly it's due to the sun. The moon is noticeably influenced by the sun as it goes around the Earth. Okay, then there's another one, and this is actually my favorite one. This one is called the Draconic month, and this one is steeped in myth, which is why it's my favorite. If you think of the solar systems, all the planets, in your school book, you've got the sun in the center, and you've got all the planets going around, and there's this nice, flat, perfect disk. That's not reality. Each planet's plane of orbit as they go around the sun is slightly tilted. They're all almost in the same plane, but they're tilted just a little tiny bit. It turns out the moon's orbit is tilted kind of by a lot. A lot is 5.1 degrees. So the moon's orbit is tilted with respect to the Earth's plane of going around the sun by 5.1 degrees. Now I want to do a demonstration here. This actually works best if I can get a couple volunteers. Can I get a couple people to help me out here? All right, come on up. All right. No, we need to. All right. Okay. Doesn't matter. Come on. All right. So this is our Earth, scaled down to the size of a basketball. It turns out the moon is about 1/4 of the diameter. It's a tiny bit bigger than a quarter. It's 0.27, not 0.25. But you can imagine if I had 4 of these tennis balls stacked on top of each other, that would be about right. So what I want you to do is hold the tennis ball representing the moon at the correct distance that you would imagine it would be for the scale between the Earth and the moon in this scale. Like, how far away do you think it would be? So you're going back quite a ways. All right, how many of you like that? How many think it's too far? Yeah. Too closer? Anybody think that it should be farther away? No, nobody's. You think it's farther away. All right. Are you ready for this? Could you stand right about here? And then you stand, I'm going to say it's going to be right about here. Are you surprised? Our cameraman is making funny faces at me because it's not wide enough angle. But so it turns out in this scale, it needs to be about 25 feet. That's how far away it is. Now, the reason this is important is because when you've got a 5.1, thank you for that. If you've got a 5.1 degree angle, just hold on a second.
Okay.
And then 5.1 degrees. So 5.1 degrees at a length of 25 feet works out to be about 2¼ feet down and about 2¼ feet up. So the moon is going up and down by about this much as it's going around the sun. So if you can imagine the sun is about 2 miles that way, the shadow of the moon is almost always missing the surface of the Earth. Almost never hits it on most of the, well, I shouldn't say almost never. More than 80% of the passes end up missing the planet entirely. And so for that reason, we don't get an eclipse every month. You would think we would, but we don't due to that going up and down thing. Thank you very much. It was observed by our ancestors that when this phenomena they didn't fully understand caused the sun to start disappearing, that there must be a dragon in the sky, and it is eating the sun. And so now we actually understand that it's the tilt of the moon's orbit that causes this to happen. But we decided that the only time that an eclipse can happen is when the moon eats the sun. So I'm going to draw another diagram here. This red line represents the plane of Earth as it goes around the sun. And this green line, which is more than 5.1 degrees, I did exaggerate, I apologize, represents how high and low the moon can go. This intersection of the plane of Earth's orbit and the plane of the moon's orbit these are called nodes. So that's one of the nodes, this is the other node, these intersection points. When it's going up, that's called an ascending node. And when it's going down, it's called the descending node. And so that makes sense. It turns out you can only have an eclipse when the moon is in one of these two nodes. And since the only time you can have an eclipse is when the moon is in one of these nodes, this next eclipse, the moon will actually be in the ascending node. There was a lunar eclipse yesterday, I think, and that was when the moon was in the descending node. But the sun was over here, so the Earth blocked the moon. So we had a partial lunar eclipse. But here we are in the ascending node for the next eclipse. And since you can only have, they measure this from ascending node to ascending node is the definition of a Draconic month. But since you can only have an eclipse in a node and the dragon eats the sun, they decided to call the cycle the Draconic month. So that's how we get that. And that's about a little over 27 days, 27.2 days. Okay, so I've mentioned these 4 different kinds of lunar months. It turns out there are more ways, but I'm only going to do four ways. This is a little video animation that you'll see. I'll go ahead and let this play. So you see the moon going around. This blue thing represents the perfect circle, and this ring represents the orbit of the moon not being a perfect circle. And there you can see the moon is passing in front of the Earth. It's going to twist it sideways for us, so we can see the shadow is in fact below the Earth. It misses it. But as it goes around, it's going to come back again. And now this time, it's actually going to hit the Earth. And we're going to get a shadow on the Earth as the moon passes in front. And so that's the phenomena that will happen. So the moon will be in the node, close to perigee, at the new moon. And when you combine all those things together, voila, you have a solar eclipse somewhere on the planet. We get about we get at least 2 total solar eclipses per month. Sometimes we might get a third one, depending on the placement. If you had one in like January, and you could imagine that you could probably squeeze 3 into a year, but you'll always get at least 2 in a year. So when I add all these together, I had the synodic month, 29.5 days, the normal month that they plaster on the calendar with the moon, new moon to new moon. The sidereal month, that was of the stars, right? 27.3 days. The Draconic is 27.2 days, a tiny bit shorter. And then that anomalistic one, that was the one where the moon might be close or far. So if we go from the near point to the next time it's at the near point, that's the anomalistic month. That's 27.5. That's just going to determine if we're going to have a total versus a annular eclipse. There is an eclipse called the hybrid eclipse. They're really rare, where the moon is just barely close enough to cause a total eclipse, and it starts out as an annular and it becomes total before the eclipse is over. Or goes the other way. Maybe it starts out as a total and it becomes an annular eclipse before it's over. Those don't happen very often, but it is a thing. So the question is, with all these orbiting bodies in space, and you can see we know the timing of these things down to pretty good precision, might there be a way that the pattern of these things repeats? And so they said, well, is there some integer that we can multiply this by, a different integer multiply that by, a different one for this, and a different one for this, such that, and I realize I just said integers and these things have decimal points on them, I apologize, such that you get the same period on each of them, or at least very close. And the answer is yes, yes there is. So I've circled these 6585.3 days, and this is what we call the Saros cycle. So you can see this is not really 239, it's 238.992, and this is not 242, it's 241.999. But what I wanted you to appreciate is these are really, really close to being integer numbers, and this one is an integer number, and I can get the same number out of these. That means that in 6,585.3 days, the position of the Earth, Moon, and Sun will be virtually identical to what it was. By the way, this translates into 18 years, 11 days with a splat mark, and 8 hours. So every 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours, the cycle of eclipses will repeat. And it will be extremely close to what it was over 18 years ago. It won't be bang on accurate because you can see these aren't perfect numbers, but it'll be really, really close. And so they call this the Saros cycle. And the Babylonians knew about it. When divers discovered the wreckage off of the island of Antikythera, and they found this mechanism that I think was the third century AD. It might have been the 3rd century BC. And they discovered it had gears. And they didn't think ancient people had mechanisms that had gears. So it was sort of like, discovering Christopher Columbus had an iPhone, right? It was like mind-blowing to archaeologists that they would find something this sophisticated. Based on how it was built, they don't think it's the only one. They just think it's the only one we've ever found. They think they probably built several of them. They were probably expensive and difficult to build, but it turns out that had all the gear combinations necessary to repeat this cycle. So they knew about the cycle. The Babylonians knew about the cycle. So we have enough sophisticated science and telescopes that we can tell you precisely why the cycle happens, but at least they understood that the cycle did happen and they understood the math behind it and how to recreate it, which I think is pretty impressive. So I did mention the types of eclipses, the partial eclipse, where the moon doesn't completely block the sun. And if you stay in Michigan on April 8th, most of Michigan, that's what you'll get, except you'll get almost all of it, just not quite all of it. This is the annular, the ring of fire, but this is the total. And in the total, you're going to see the solar corona. The moon is completely covered. All right. The reason that we have the total is because this distance is short relative to the perigee. And so there's a cone, a shadow cone. There's actually 2 shadow cones. This is because the sun is about a half a degree from edge to edge. So from one edge of the sun, when the moon is blocking it, there's still light that makes it from the other edge of the sun that has not yet been blocked. And so that creates this larger shadowy circle that we call the penumbra, where it's just starting to get dimmer and dimmer and dimmer as the moon is blocking. But if you get to the very middle of it, the sun is completely blocked. It's completely blocked. You will see the solar corona. It's pretty amazing. You'll see some other phenomena. You'll see Bailey's beads. You might see shadow bands. You'll see the diamond ring effect. So you'll see some pretty amazing stuff that happens. You won't see any of those things if you're not in totality. You got to be in totality to see any of those. This is the other kind, the annular. Now the moon is a little bit farther away, And so the cone comes all the way to the end before reaching the surface of the Earth. And since the cone ends before reaching the Earth, there is no place on Earth that you can stand where the sun is completely blocked. So you'll always see that ring going all the way around it. All right, so here's an eclipse simulation that I put together. And this is a little bit hard to see with the light in here, but you can see this ring around here. That's the path of the partial eclipse. And then in the very center of it, boy, it's even hard for me, and I'm standing at the board here, there's a little tiny circle right there, a little bullseye. There it is. I'm kind of following it up. That is the path of totality, coming up through Texas, through Mexico, through Texas, through these states sort of east of the Mississippi, through Ohio, Indiana, and then over Lake Erie. And off it goes. So that is our next eclipse. That's how it's going to occur relative to the sun. That shadow that I talked about is moving at about 1,600 miles an hour. So Delta Airlines is, I think it's sold out, a flight that is going to leave Austin. It's an eclipse viewing flight that's going to leave Austin, Texas, and land in Detroit, Michigan. And they're going to try and insert the plane into the path of totality. Keep in mind, commercial jets travel around 500-ish miles an hour, maybe just slightly faster. The moon shadow is doing 1,600. They will not keep up. they will extend the period of totality a little bit. I wouldn't want to be on that plane because my fear, my personal fear, is that I'm going to miss most of the eclipse, because if you're not in the window seat, you really can't see up there. So if you are in the window seat, you're going to be, doing that. So that was just my own, like, you got to be on the right side of the plane. So it makes
Tickets are more.
Yes. All right. So the Saros cycle we talked about, 18 years. So I mentioned this 11.333. So I put a splat mark on the 11, and that's because every 4 years we have leap year. And so depending on how many of these 18 years end up being leap years, that might be an extra day. Right? So that it could be 12 days instead, 12.3 days. But the actual number of days, that 6585.3, that's the right number. You just have to figure out how to divide that into years based on the number of leap years that you have. It doesn't go on forever. We have done simulations to validate our science. So we think we know how this works. So we put it all together, and instead of predicting eclipses in the future, we predict eclipses in the past. I know that sounds like a cop-out, but the reason that we predict the past with the simulation is then we go back and look for records in the past. We say, oh, we think there should have been an eclipse at this place on the planet in this period of time in history. Now let's go looking for records to see if we can find any records from that era where that got noted that it happened. And so that helps us validate that we understand it. So we've actually gone backward 2,000 years and validated that, yes, the math is in fact correct. Then we ran the math forward 1,000 years. And so we know that we can accurately predict the eclipses in the next 1,000 years. We've not tried to go beyond the 1,000 years. So the cycle may start to change over time. So what's the Saros look like? So here's the Saros eclipses for the years 2021 through 2030. A little bit of a color thing. If it's red, it's an annular eclipse, so it's not total. If it's blue, it's total. And then each one of these is dated, right? So here's our total eclipse here. It'll start at that point south of Hawaii, go across the US, and end just sort of approaching the coast of Europe up here, but it won't quite make it there before it falls off the edge of the Earth. And that's our total eclipse. That's the one that we're going for in April. But I'll make this easy. Let's pick this one, 2030, June 1st. So June 1st is an easy day. That's why I picked it. This is an annular eclipse. Notice where that is, right? It's just, you get this arch thing here. Now I'm going to advance this. Instead of 2021 through 2030, we're going to take this to, we'll take this forward to 2041 to 2050. And notice, first of all, that arch is not here anymore. Now it's here. It's moved to the left, right? Why did it move to the left? because the Earth had to spin for another 8 hours. Right? It's not an exact number of days. So when you let the Earth keep spinning west to east for another 8 hours, you go 1/3 of the way across the map. So that's our third of a day. And then notice the date is, instead of 2030, it's 2048, so that's 18 years. And we were on June 1st, but now we're on June 11th. So we've gone forward 11 days. So we've gone 18 years, 11 days, and 8 hours. And so that cycle repeats. Odd thing about the Saros is the first eclipse in a Saros cycle will always start, there are lots of Saroses going on, by the way, at the same time. The first one always starts in Antarctica, and then when it repeats, each time it repeats, it will be slightly farther north than the last time it happened, until it eventually goes off the top of the North Pole. And that's because the eclipse circumstances don't precisely repeat the pattern. So now you know a little bit about how we know when eclipses are going to happen, how we know where they're going to happen. There's all these different ways to do the moon, how to define a lunar month, which is probably more than you bargained for when you signed up to come to this talk. All right, so let's talk about what they look like, what you're going to see. So in this eclipse, when it begins, we call these things the contacts. So there are 4 of them. First contact is the point where the disk of the moon, which you can't see because it's black, kisses the disk of the sun and takes the first tiny little nibble out of it. So the moment that the moon touches the sun or appears to touch the sun, that's called the first contact. And it will continue to progress for about an hour and a half until it completely covers. You can see it's almost covered it. That's about what you'll see from here. If you don't go down to totality, that's about what you'll see, the sliver of a moon. When it completely covers, we call that the second contact. In the path of totality on the center line, you're going to get just about 4 minutes, and then the moon will start to move off of the surface of the sun. And as soon as sunlight peeks out the other side of the moon, that's called the third contact. And of course, fourth contact is when the moon is completely finished. No part of the sun is covered anymore. So those are the 4 contacts. The excitement everybody is waiting for is between the second and third contact. That's totality. So as this happens, some interesting things happen. When you get down to this little sliver, if you are out on a sunny day, you just put your hand out and look at the shadow on the ground, and you'll see the shadow of your fingers. They'll be a little bit fuzzy. And the reason they're fuzzy is because the sun is not a pinpoint of light. It's a disk about a half a degree across. Right? So this is a disk. But when you're down to this, you're getting this little sliver of light. So what you will notice is that it is getting dimmer and dimmer and dimmer. It would still be quite bright to look at the sun, but on the ground it'll be dimmer. You'll notice that your shadow starts to become razor sharp. It's kind of freaky to watch that happen to your shadow. The other thing that you'll notice is just before totality starts, we get this pattern here. Oh, by the way, we get this. I'll talk about something called shadow bands. That happens when we're almost down to nothing. But when just before totality hits, we get this effect. This is called the Bailey's beads. This effect is caused because the moon is not a perfect sphere, right? It's not a cue ball. It has mountains and valleys and craters and things like that. And so we sent this probe to the moon called Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, NASA's LRO, and it has done an incredible job of mapping the surface of the moon and the topology with staggering accuracy. And I do mean staggering accuracy because I have software that predicts for each eclipse precisely the pattern of where you will see the Bailey's beads, where you will see each little bit of light. And every time we get the eclipse, that is exactly where it shows up in the photograph. So the fact that we can be that accurate, to me, is quite impressive that humans have come so far. But this is little bits of sunlight peeking through the gaps in the mountains. So you can imagine mountains here, and this is where there are large enough gaps for sunlight to shine through. And so they call that effect the Bailey's beads. When more of the sun gets blocked, that'll go out, that'll go out, that'll go out, that'll go out. This one will still put out a little dot of light. This is called the diamond ring effect. And so you can see why there's your diamond and there's a ring. And so they call that the diamond ring. And then when totality occurs, you're going to get, and I have a bigger picture of this later, you're going to get the solar corona. And so you will not see the bright disk of the sun anymore, but you will see this corona stretching out in the sun's atmosphere, projecting that. And so I'm doing this thing called the Eclipse Mega Movie, where I'm gathering science for research purposes. They're trying to study jets in the corona over hours. And they said, well, if we have enough photographers taking pictures for hours throughout the eclipse, we can actually watch the corona make progress over time and learn some science out of that. If you look carefully, you can kind of see detail on the moon here. You won't see that. For you, it will be completely black. This only happens because the photographer really opened up the camera exposure to allow this to overexpose, and then we cheat. We stack the images. So we take the dimmest image to the brightest image. We put them together in software to get the full extent of the solar corona. This is called Earth shine, because obviously if this is the side of the moon that's facing the Earth and the sun is behind it, nothing should be able to light up that surface of the moon, at least not direct sunlight. So what happens is the sun is lighting up the surface of the Earth, and the Earth is reflecting some glow back at the moon. And they call that effect the Earth shine. Yeah.
Back to that last slide, you were saying when it starts to come, if you hold out your hand, it looks all fuzzy, and then as it happens, it becomes very, very clear. Can you explain that again? Because I totally...
Yes. So on a normal day, you got to have no clouds, right? So you got on a normal clear day, nothing to do with the eclipse.
Which never happens in Michigan.
Right. Sometimes, yeah. So if you hold out your hand, right? I mean, you see your shadow on a sunny day quite easily. If you hold out your hand, you'll notice that instead of having a really sharp shadow of your hand, you'll have a fuzzy shadow of your hand. Now, if you held it really close to the ground, you'd see a sharp shadow. But when you're holding it up high, it's going to be a fuzzy shadow, and that's because the sun is not a pinpoint of light, it's a half a degree from edge to edge. And so off of every edge of your skin, you've got to imagine a half a degree separation of light spreading out due to the width of the sun. And so that causes your shadow to be a little bit fuzzy. It's not horribly fuzzy, but it is fuzzy. As we get down to almost nothing left, instead of a half a degree wide, you just have this little sliver. And so since the sun no longer appears to be a half a degree wide, you actually get razor sharp shadows on the ground. So you'll...
Earlier it's fuzzy, and then as it comes right in,
Yes.
just that little bit, that's when it's really sharp.
And when totality ends and the sun pops out again, you'll have another sharp shadow, and then it will start to go fuzzy again the more and more sun is revealed. So that's the shadow effect.
Cool, I want to check that out.
Yeah, there's other stuff I'll show you. So this is the 2017 eclipse that we had across America. So this was a total solar eclipse. The question is, can we see it from the space station? Yes, we can. So here's the space station. This is a Russian Soyuz module that's docked. One of the rules when we send modules up to the space station that have people on them, not the cargo modules, but the modules with people, they don't leave. They stay there for safety reasons. If for some reason there was a failure on the space station and they could not maintain a healthy environment, astronauts would need a lifeboat. And so they don't want to undock these things and send them back to Earth empty. They just leave them here. And this is the refuge where they go for to be safe. If they had the disaster and they, wasn't temporary, wasn't fixable, they would actually undock and return back to Earth. But that's why you see this module docked on the space station. But this is the station, and you can see way out over here, this black region, and that is the 2017 eclipse that we had in August, several years back. And this is the outer shadow of the moon, that I called it the penumbral shadow, and then it gets darker and darker and darker, and you don't quite see it, but there's an intense dark spot in the very center. So that's you can see them from space. So let's talk about planets a little bit. So this is set up for, I think I picked Norwich, Ohio, just south of Cedar Point. It's on the path of totality south of Cedar Point. And I set up my planetarium software for that location, set the time to totality in this area. And then I exported the image, but I told it to turn on the planets. And you can see when totality happens and the sky gets dark, Jupiter, Mercury, Venus, Saturn, and it's not marked here, but very, very, very close to Saturn is also Mars. So there'll be 5 planets that are visible during the eclipse. But I will say that Jupiter will be really bright and Venus will be really bright. These will be dim. And so one of the tips that I sometimes give people is be a pirate. So you take your strong eye, your dominant eye versus your not dominant eye, and you put an eye patch on one of your eyes. And the reason you do this is to get dark adapted. If we turn out all the lights, if it was bright in here and we turned out all the lights, you wouldn't really see anything. You say, it's completely dark, it's not safe to walk around. But after about 20 minutes, you'd find that you can actually see and you can walk around. And that's because your pupils actually take about 40 to 45 minutes to fully dilate, but after about 20 minutes, they are most of the way there. And so your eyes become more sensitive the longer you're in the dark. If you turn on a bright light, even for a couple of seconds, pupils go back down again. Now you gotta wait the whole process all over again. So if you put an eye patch on, and then when totality comes, you pop the eye patch off, one of your eyes will be dark adapted, and it will have an easy time picking out stars and planets. Remember, you're only gonna get about 4 minutes of totality, not nearly enough time for your eyes to dark adapt at that time. So if you pre-dark adapt one of them by cheating with the eye patch, that's a good trick. Here's a photographer that did a time series, just setting up a tripod, not moving it, and taking periodic images. And they can create that, just click, click, click all the way through, and then use some software to merge the whole sequence together. And you can get the whole thing if you wanted to do that. I somewhat discourage people from doing eclipse photography. I actually do a talk on how to do eclipse photography. I myself do eclipse photography. It is one of the most technical types of photography you would ever think to do. The timing of when the shutter takes a shot is extremely important, down to within 1/10 of a second in terms of the precision. If you want to capture Bailey's beads, you have just the tiniest fraction of a second when you got to get those things, or you're going to miss it. And there's a lot of effects that are like that. And so when totality happens, you got to take these bracketed shots. So a bracket means you're doubling the amount of light in the camera. So you take a shot, set the exposure to twice as long, take a shot, set the exposure to twice as long as the last one, take a shot. You keep doing that 14 times in a row. So you could imagine if you've never seen a total solar eclipse before, you only have a couple of minutes, and you're fiddling with this camera, taking a shot, changing exposure, taking a shot, changing exposure, you've missed the whole thing. So I'm like, unless you have software that completely automates it for you, I would say don't do it. Enjoy your first total solar eclipse. People cry at these things. People scream at these things. It's a very emotional event. We do have partial eclipses. There was one in 2013 that we saw here from Michigan at sunset. It looked a lot like this. I actually thought that was the 2013 eclipse in Michigan that I was at. Turns out it's not. This is a photo by Fred Espenak. Fred Espenak is retired now, NASA physicist responsible for eclipse predictions. And this guy is the foremost expert on the planet on eclipse photography. There's a book with a chapter dedicated to how to do it, written by Fred Espenak. So he's really, really good at eclipses. He's got a website called MrEclipse.com. And he's also got another website called EclipseWise.com. And those are both Fred Espenak's website. So this guy's the real deal. He's a NASA physicist. The eclipse that we're going to see in April 8th, all the path, sometimes if you check the path in the maps, you'll see credit Fred Espenak. It's because he's the guy that actually did all of the math behind the predictions that says this is exactly where it will be at exactly this time. That's the guy. So credits to him. More fun that you can have. Anybody recognize what this is? Calendar, kitchen calendar. So, but this isn't the calendar, this is the shadow that the calendar is casting on the ground. So somebody grabbed a calendar and they're just holding it up in the air and letting, this is not totality, this is the partial phases. So based on the look of this, the moon is probably close to 50% covered. And you see a whole bunch of little projections of the half-eclipsed sun in there. And that's because, remember in the old days of photography, before they knew how to grind lenses, they used to have this thing called a pinhole camera. In fact, if you were ever in scouting, they probably taught you how to make a pinhole camera. So you get a shoebox, you put a piece of unexposed film on one side of it, you pop a little pinhole on the other side of it, you do all this in the dark, you close the thing, and then you hold the box in some really brightly well-lit scene for a couple of minutes, and then you cover it up, take it inside, and develop the film, and you got a photo without a lens. And so this is basically a whole bunch of pinhole camera projection. It's not super sharp, but you get it. This is the shadow of a tree, and everywhere there's a gap in the tree, a gap through the leaves, it's projecting this shape onto the ground. So there's really cool ways so you're going to have an opportunity to get safe eclipse glasses here. But even if you couldn't get eclipse glasses, rather than taking a chance, you can do indirect viewing of the sun using these tricks. This is another interesting trick. This is just a sheet that somebody's laid on the ground. And it's quite a big sheet. It's probably like the size of a queen bed sheet or king bed sheet or something like that they've laid on the ground. I don't know, it could be vinyl for all I know. But if you've looked at a swimming pool on a sunny day, no one's in the pool, the water is perfectly still. I mean, perfectly flat. And the water is just, you see the sunlight shining on the bottom of the pool. Go over to the edge of the pool and with your fingers just sort of tap, 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 and make a couple of ripples on the water. And you'll notice that on the bottom of the pool, you can see the ripple pattern echoing all around the pool. And you get these patterns dancing on the floor of the pool. And those are shadows caused by the water acting like a lens, refracting, right? And so you get these dancing patterns. It turns out, when the sun is down to just a pinpoint of light, remember I told you that your shadow will start to become razor sharp? At the point where the shadow becomes razor sharp, what happens is our upper atmosphere, we don't think about it like water, but it turns out hot and cold air is mixing and it's turbulent. It's not a nice even blend, and that is causing sunlight to sort of bend around as it makes it through our atmosphere. It doesn't actually take a perfectly straight line, and that causes this weird blotchy pattern to appear. This pattern will actually very slowly dance. It's not fast, it's a slow dance that it does, but you'll notice it's sort of bouncing around, making wavy patterns, just like the bottom of a pool. We call those shadow bands. You only see it with just the very last bit of crescent sunlight before totality, or just after the moon is exiting, when the sliver of sunlight is reappearing, and you get those things. Not every eclipse does them, but I have a feeling it will happen here in Michigan. And it has to do with the jet stream, right? So we are in an area where the jet stream is often overhead, and the jet stream is really good at mixing up the hot and cold air and causing these turbulent effects. If you're in a place that's like a strong high pressure system, there's no jet stream around, there's no cold front, there's no warm front within 200 miles of you, and it's a calm day, you won't get this effect. But here, we probably will get this effect. Okay. So this is the picture of the solar corona. It's a bit hard to see, but so you have to keep your eclipse glasses on until, I would say, about 10 seconds, maybe 15 seconds before totality. So you're going to have these on the entire time that you're looking at the sun. About 10 seconds before totality, you can take them off without going blind. 10 seconds won't be enough, and enough of the sun is blocked. I wouldn't go much more than that. And in those moments, you will actually see this pink thing here? That's the solar corona. So not the corona, I'm sorry, that's a prominence erupting out of the side of the sun. So the lower part of the sun's atmosphere is called the chromosphere. The bright part of the atmosphere is called the photosphere. That's the part we think about when we see the disk of the sun. But the chromosphere usually requires a special telescope to be able to see it that filters out all the wavelengths of light except one. But when totality begins, before the sun is completely blocked, you'll see little bits of any prominences that are erupting out of the side of the sun. You'll actually see those with your eyes, which is why I kind of like to cheat and take the glasses off like maybe a second or two early to be able to do that, a few seconds early. At the end of Totality, put your Eclipse glasses back on again. Enjoy the rest of the eclipse. If you can't get these glasses, at great expense, you will have to make some changes to your retirement account to do this. You can construct a device out of things that you probably have laying around your house. I told you this was going to be expensive. Anybody shop at Amazon? Anybody? Yeah, you probably have some of these in your house, these cardboard boxes. You take the cardboard box, and I've sort of shown it with the side cut out so you can see what's going on. You wouldn't actually cut out the side. You would just open the box, tape a white sheet of paper on one side of the box. On the other side of the box, you're going to make two holes. One is a big hole so that you can look through it with your eyes, so it needs to be big enough to see through. The other hole you're going to make, you'll probably cover it up with a little piece of aluminum foil and just poke a little tiny pinhole in here, and that's going to be the sun hole. So a shaft of, and you don't want to stand in front of that or it won't work. So you stand off to the side so you can see through this hole here and let a shaft of sunlight go through here, and it will project the eclipse progress onto the sheet of paper. So it's kind of cool. You can make one of those. Do it with your kids, your grandkids. They'll have fun. And you can even put your head in it and become a box head. So it's the latest in fashion. So send out selfies. All right, so these eclipse glasses, I wanted to talk about. The key thing about the eclipse glasses, so I'm a NASA Solar System ambassador. One rule of NASA is that NASA doesn't endorse products. But we will tell you what you need, but we won't give you a brand name. So there is this ISO 12312-2. So if I look at these glasses, there it is, ISO 12312-2. This is the standard that glasses have to be safe enough to view the sun for extended periods of time, not just eclipses. You could look at the sun on any sunny day with these things. And you have to block 99.996% of the sunlight. So I regularly get people, can't I just use sunglasses? What if I put 2 pairs of sunglasses on or 3 pairs of sunglasses? No, not anywhere safe enough, like not even close. So if you take one of these pairs of glasses, here, I'll hold this up to the projector. Okay, so I'm just looking at the really bright light of that projector here. I see nothing. That projector isn't bright enough, right? Out in sunlight, I actually have been in studio lights where I could barely see the filament in the light bulb through these. But these things block about 99.999% of all the sunlight. You do want to make sure that they are undamaged. If somebody put them in their pocket, got them wrinkled, crinkled, holes in them, ripped, torn, don't use them, throw them out, keep them safe. But this is what you need. And there is a website here. So AAS is the American Astronomical Society. And so if you go to aas.org, you don't have to remember the whole URL. If you just remember aas.org, there'll be a pull-down menu at the top for eclipses. And you go there, and then there'll be like how to watch solar eclipses safely. And then as you scroll down the page, there's a link for where do I get these solar eclipse glasses? And they'll give a list of all the manufacturers and all the stores that are known to sell eclipse glasses known to be safe. We have already had incidents of fakes popping up. So one of the vendors is a company called Thousand Oaks Optical, and they make eclipse filters, and they are safe. But they discovered someone selling glasses on Amazon.com branded as Thousand Oak Optical eclipse glasses, but they said, those aren't ours. So, and they even had the ISO certification on it, right? Because I mean, anybody can print a piece of cardboard. So who knows what they are, actually, but I wouldn't use them, right? So there'll be a whole list of sources of where you can go to get eclipse glasses that are known to be safe. NASA doesn't endorse any of them. What we do endorse is you want glasses that conform to that certification. And we know that these guys have a really good list. You can trust the list that they've generated. If you have a telescope or binoculars, you can also outfit it. There are vendors that sell, it looks like a cap that goes on the front of the telescope that's got a filter. Some people make their own, so this is a homemade one. where they ordered the film. You can actually just buy the raw film. So the same film that's in these glasses you can buy, and then they just sandwich that in a piece of cardboard and fit it to the front of binoculars, telescopes, whatever, as a low-cost way to do that. Photographing the eclipse, I don't normally recommend that people do this. Like I said, you kind of ruin the fun if your head is buried in the equipment and you're missing all the excitement. But yes, the camera also needs the same filtering systems to be safe. There's a company that I used to rent camera equipment from if I needed a lens that I didn't have. And they rented out lenses and camera bodies for the Eclipse in 2017, and they got them back and they look like this. By the way, that's not actually what it's supposed to look like. And then here's a burn mark through there. This is a sensor that's been damaged here. So I tell people, yeah, no, it'll wreck your camera too if you don't have filters on it. So scientists are trying to capture data from this, right? So we sometimes use telescopes in space, and we have this thing called a coronagraph, which blocks just the disk of the sun and lets us simulate a solar eclipse. But during this eclipse, we're going to have more than 1,000 photographers, I think. That was the goal anyway. I don't know how many they actually got, all along the path of totality. And they'll be studying the development and progress of the corona following these things called coronal jets that shoot out. So there's all kinds of safe stuff. I tease people, do not stare directly into sun with last remaining working eyeball. You do have 2 of them. But actually, I would prefer that you don't ruin either of your eyeballs. That would be the better thing to do. I didn't verify this myself, but I had somebody that said that no, they did verify it, that after the last eclipse, so we do get people at every eclipse that don't have the glasses. They stare at the sun for too long. Yes, you can get away with a couple seconds. You cannot get away with a couple minutes. It's kind of like getting a sunburn. You're out in the sun too long. You don't think that you've had too much sun. Later on, you go inside the house, and hours later, all of a sudden you realize it hurts everywhere that the sun burned your skin. But you don't know about this until hours later. Damage to your eyes, 24 to 48 hours before you realize that you've done this. So you can torch your retinas, and I'm told, I didn't verify this personally, but I'm told that yes, they examined patients and found the retina scarring pattern in the shape of the crescent sun because of the burn. Your eyes, I'm told, will sometimes compensate for that. We actually do have blind spots in our eyes that we can't see, and your brain sort of fills in, your brain is sort of surveying, and it fills in the missing information. I'm told that after a while, your eyes can sort of develop a way of trying to compensate for it, but you did just torch your eyes, and it's the only eyes you get, so I wouldn't do it. This is kind of a fun video. Hopefully the audio works. So this person in this video standing here, her name is Violet. Her husband, Ken, is the avid astronomer who is at every one of our astronomy events. Violet has never been to a total solar eclipse before. She hasn't seen one of these things yet. And you're going to notice, so I'm going to run a simulation. Well, it's not a simulation. This is a 360 camera. So it's on a tripod. One of the cameras is facing one way, the other camera is facing the other way. So these two combined are 360 degrees. The sun is way up here. Because this is a really wide angle lens, you're not going to see the solar corona in this. But it's really Violet that you need to pay attention to. And watch what happens. Somebody who's never seen one of these before.
We're looking to see the shadow coming.
You'll hear me call out the times.
I'm looking for the shadow.
Camera filters off! Camera filters off!
Okay, that means we're within 30 seconds, so you can take it off a camera. I wouldn't take it off my eyes yet.
Not yet.
Remember, the shadow is coming at us at 1,600 miles an hour.
12 seconds!
There we go. That's Violet. Still Violet. Now this eclipse is only 2 minutes of totality. We're going to get close to 4 if you're near the center line. And you can see how dark it's gotten. Temperature's dropping rapidly.
You can see
There's the sun.
Liquid rising all around you. Sunset all
The sky's a little red over here. You'll see a 360-degree sunset. The sky will be orange all the way around you.
Oh my
Venus is
God!
the big bright one. But the one right next to is Mercury, right? See the little red spots? Those are the prominences.
Yes, I see it. Oh, it's cool.
So I mentioned the prominences pop out. See those?
Yes. Look at our sky. Oh, dark kids.
So I did warn you, people get emotional.
I love
And in a few seconds here, things start to calm down a little bit. People are enjoying it. In a few moments,
What do you say?
the sun will start to come out again. It'll brighten up quickly.
It's beautiful, just with the naked eye.
40 seconds left.
40 seconds. Okay.
Here, I'm going to take a picture of you.
No, just look. Just look.
I have to take a picture of you so our kids
No,
can
don't take a
find
picture.
it.
Don't take a picture. Just look.
I want them to see us looking at the...
What's that?
So you're going to see Bailey's beads. Violet, keep on looking.
With
You're
the...
going to see Bailey's beads, and then when you see diamond ring, that's when you got to look away, okay?
You heard what he said? When you see the diamond ring, look away.
So Bailey's beads, you see more red.
I see the red. I see
Oh, I
the
see the big
red.
prominences.
Oh, looks great.
So once you see the big bright diamond ring,
And she's looking through binoculars. So you can look at, and there we go. There's the end of it. And so now it's coming back out again.
take a picture of us. Go. And now we're going to look to see the shadow go away. We're going to look to see the shadow go away up the hill at 1500, yeah. So we're going to see the shadow go away at 1500 miles an hour.
So that was in Casper, Wyoming.
No, we're going to watch the shadow go away. So watch the shadow go away.
And I think we're about done. It doesn't tell me the progress on the... Okay, yeah, that's it. All right.
Tripods or telescopes in that?
Yes. So the reason that area is roped off, this caution tape says science in progress. That's what we had. We had special caution tape made up for this. All of the telescopes in this area are gathering science data and sending it back to, I think this science data was going back to Berkeley. The one that I'm doing now is going back to Sonoma State, but it's sponsored by NASA. And so one of the issues is before the eclipse, before totality, because we only care about the data that we get in totality, we let anybody into this area and they can actually look through these telescopes. They all have, say, filters on them. When we get down to about 15 minutes prior to totality, we rope the area off and we're closed until totality is over, because now the telescopes can't be interrupted while they gather all the science data for us. So that's why you see this roped off area. So some of these are binoculars, some of these are telescopes, some of them are cameras, but they all have cameras on them. She was using binoculars to look at the eclipse. You can do that during totality. And you heard what he said, as soon as you see the diamond ring, look away. You do not want to use any magnified tool like a telescope or binocular to look at the sun at any time when the sun is not completely covered. And that's why he said, look away. So if you have binoculars, you can bring them with you. Just don't use them in any of the partial phases unless you have filters on them. And they do make filters for binoculars too. And so there you go. April 8th is the perfect time to get mooned. I did promise you there would be a bigger image of this with the earth shine. This is actually a colleague of mine, another solar system ambassador. I have a similar image that I did, but he made this particular slide, and so that's his image. And that's all I have. So happy to take questions that you might have.
When he said to take, like, look away when you see the diamond ring,
Yeah.
you can still look with the glasses.
Oh, yes.
Just not with
Yeah, in fact, you have a few more seconds. If you wanted to look at the moon as the diamond ring to see if you can, because after the diamond ring, you'll see the Bailey's beads. You won't really see that through the eclipse glasses. But once you see the Bailey's beads, that's it. You got to have, and that's about 10 seconds tops. And then you got to have the eclipse glasses back on. But if you're using any form of magnification, binoculars, telescope, anything like that, a long camera lens, you must not look at the sun even for a moment directly at the sun. That's why I said the moment you see the diamond ring, look away, pull the binoculars away. You don't want to let them torch your eyes. That would be really bad.
You will be able to see the Bailey's beads with the glasses.
With the glasses on, you probably will not see the Bailey's beads. They're because it's. You might see a few dots. Yeah. You'll get a couple seconds, right? So there is a guy at the last eclipse who's actually an ophthalmologist, and he did the whole lecture. He's an astronomer and ophthalmologist, and so he did a whole lecture on eye safety. And it turns out the number of seconds. I tease the kids. How many of you have been told, do not stare directly at the sun? Right, and they all raise their hands. How many of you, despite being told not to stare directly at the sun, stared directly at the sun? And about half of them will raise their hands. So the trick is, the smaller your pupils will constrict, the more seconds you can kind of get away with. It's really a bad idea. I don't recommend it. Some people might possibly get away with 20 seconds, but I have to say, there are people who are definitely doing eye damage in 20 seconds. So you don't chance the 20 seconds, right? Some people can go longer. So I tell people 5 seconds, okay. 10 seconds, okay. Do not go beyond 10. It's just bad, bad, bad.
I was a teacher, and I had my kindergartners. We were on a field trip, and we were at a farm, and a perfect way to look at it, I never told the kindergartners, we were in the barn, I realized the knot holes in the wood on the end of the thing were making circles on the ground, and I knew an eclipse was coming. And so while the kids were watching the animals, I was watching the escape. It was a perfect spot. So if you know where a barn is with knot holes that are knocked out, it was a beautiful thing. There's like 20 of them going on all at once, the eclipse.
And you would think that hole needs to be a perfect circle for it to work. It turns out not. There was another solar system ambassador that took a piece of cardstock. I'll just use this postcard here. And you can get those hole punches, right? Well, you can get them in, most of them just pop a round hole, so you can put it in like a 3-ring binder. But you can get them star-shaped and triangle-shaped. And so they created a series of holes all punched with a hole punch of a different size. And when you hold that card really close to the ground, you see the shadow of the hole. So if it's a star shape, you see a star. When you pull it away from the ground, all of the projections of light turn into the shape of the eclipsed sun, regardless of the shape that was punched in the card. It's kind of a cool thing. It kind of bends their mind a little bit. It's like, why would that happen? So it's kind of fun if you want to stretch them a little. Yeah, any other questions? Yeah.
Could you just repeat when it's going to be safe to take off the solar glasses at what point during the eclipse?
I would not, and here's the caveat is how would you know this, right? So I have software running on my laptop that has a GPS, and it's doing all these sophisticated calculations. And I know, you heard me on the video yelling out 40 seconds. Well, how did I know that it was 40 seconds? I knew down to 1/10 of a second when the sun was going to be eclipsed. So there is a couple of apps that you can get for your phone that will tell you when each eclipse phenomena will when it will happen. And so you can see when it's going to happen. If you knew exactly when second contact is going to happen, in other words, the sun is going to be completely black, you can get away with taking these off a few seconds before. I wouldn't do it more than 10. 5 seconds is going to be fine. The Bailey's beads effect happens within a second of totality, and then you finish with the diamond ring effect. And then once the eclipse is over, it goes in the other direction, right? Because the sun is being revealed. It turns out, based on the LRO data that we have, there won't be much in the way of Bailey's beads when the sun is first covered at second contact, but there will be substantial Bailey's beads when the sun is uncovered at third contact. That will be the more interesting time. But you can get an app, well, I don't remember the name of that app. You can get an app for your iPhone or your Android phone that gives you the timings, and it uses the GPS and it figures out what timings it will be for where you are. And so you can take the glasses off a few seconds early. Again, the more interesting stuff will happen at third contact when the things are being re-revealed. And so first there it's obvious because boom, here comes the light. And then within 10 seconds of that, just make sure you put these back on. Make sense?
If you don't have the app, is there a way to?
No, I wouldn't chance it. If you don't know that you only have 10 seconds or less, I wouldn't chance it. I mean, it's, like I said, you only got 2 eyes, and you're not getting new ones. Yes, sir.
Where will you be going to view the eclipse?
That's a good question. Where to go for the eclipse? So I am trying to hedge my bets a little bit. It turns out, so you kind of want to at least go to Ohio if you can. Even in Toledo, you would see totality. On the shore of Lake Erie, if you're directly on the shore, there's an interesting phenomenon that happens with cloud cover, right? So we typically have more cloudy days than clear days in this part of the country in the month of April. So the odds are not that good. I want to say there's like a slightly less than a 40% chance of clear skies and something like a 60-something% chance that it'll be cloudy. It turns out, if you know a little bit of the science of how clouds form, you've probably all seen a photograph of like atomic bomb blowing up and you get the big column going up and then it turns into a mushroom. And you don't see that when you look at a normal cloud. But in fact, that is what's happening. So you have thermals from the warm Earth warming up and pushing air currents up, taking moisture with it. So you've got a stem like a mushroom, but it's not visible because it's warm enough that the moisture in the air is not condensing into visible steam or vapor, yeah. Once it gets up high enough in altitude and it's cold enough, now it does condense and you see a cloud. So think about that. The Earth heats faster than the water. So water in April is going to be really cold. You're not going to have thermal activity coming off of the lakes. So those sort of popcorn clouds that we get tend to not happen over water. They tend to happen over land. Knowing that, if you're on the shore of the lake, you have better probability that you might have clear skies than if you're miles and miles and miles inland. I have a sailboat. I go up on Lake Huron, and a lot of times I'm out on the lake and I can see all the clouds are over the land, and yet it's sunny where I am over the water. So that's one little tip. But I am actually going all the way down to Texas for the eclipse, to a town called Gatesville. And this is because I'm not from Texas, but I have friends that are from Texas. And they said, well, the north, you think of Texas as this hot, dry state, but it's really not. The eastern half of Texas is actually lots of moisture, lots of rain, and clouds and things like that. In fact, the very eastern part is kind of swampy. The western side, particularly southwestern, is desert-like. And they said, Waco, Texas is kind of the magic line. If you are southwest of Waco, you probably will have desert climate and not very likely that you will have clouds. If you're northeast of that, then clouds are more likely. So there are all sorts of meteorologists making bets about the El Nino. What will that do to the weather? Will it cause it to be clearer up here? Will it cause it to be cloudier up here? The latest that I've heard, that I've read, is they kind of expect that the northern parts of Ohio may actually be more likely to be clear, the middle states more likely to be cloudy, and then down to Texas more likely to be clear again. So the other thing I will tell you is meteorology forecasts beyond 3 days uses a certain model to predict the weather. less than 3 days, completely different model to predict the weather. So the model within 3 days tends to be more accurate. So as the days are leading up to the eclipse, when you within 3 days start watching the forecast really crazy, if you are able to make flexible plans, I promise you all the hotels in the path of totality are sold out. I promise you all the campgrounds are sold out. That's how it was in 2017. You couldn't get a spot anywhere. A lot of people will make up, since it's going to be about around 3-ish in the afternoon here, a lot of people will plan to drive into the path of totality on the day of the eclipse. So think about this. You live in Michigan, you want to go to Ohio. What road are you going to take? I don't want to be on I-75. So it would be a really good idea to have one of those apps on your phone that can find the side roads and the farm roads. When the 2017 eclipse was over, I tell people, imagine every sports stadium in the city is letting out at exactly the same time. Every concert venue is letting out at the same time. Madonna's letting out, the Rolling Stones are letting out, right? Everybody's letting out at exactly the same time. Traffic was a nightmare trying to, and oh, by the way, they all want to leave right after third contact. They don't even wait until the very, very end. So I said, make plans for dinner. let those people go. I actually did stay quite late, and even when I left, I'm heading home from Casper, Wyoming, and I'm driving up, and I'm getting to the point where I'm about to get on the freeway, and my directions app on my phone says, no, keep going. Don't take this on-ramp. I'm like, no, it's right here. Well, there's like a big hill in the way. I couldn't see the freeway. I'm like, no, it's right here. And I'm like, don't take the ramp. Right? So I go under the bridge, and it puts me on a farm road that parallels the freeway. And I'm like one of 2 or 3 cars on the farm road, and I'm looking at the freeway. It is a parking lot. And I knew people that were stuck there, and they said, we were in that parking lot for about 6 hours. So there's probably a crease in the earth where all those people were. So just be aware that traffic will be a mess. If there's any way you can get in super early in the morning, or better yet, the night before, much better idea. And be patient, right? Just understand this is just what people are going to do. Be patient and let it all die down.
Just one more.
Yeah.
When you said the camera lenses are melting or get damaged?
It's not the glass. It's that, all right, so everybody's played with the magnifying glass and catch paper and leaves and stuff like that on fire. And right, you're basically focusing the sun into a sharp beam. Well, that's what your camera lens is doing. So you've got this shutter on your camera that's closed, right? And it is being torched by a beam of sunlight, which is intensely hot, and it's melting the shutter inside the, so it's usually not the lens itself that takes the damage. Although if the lens has an aperture, the aperture blades take, in fact, the first photo I showed was aperture blades on a camera lens, and those did get melted.
And those are what type of cameras? Just
those were
SLRs
probably sophisticated DSLR cameras, nice cameras, not phones. But it almost wouldn't matter, right? You're intensifying all this sunlight. So I have solar filters for all of my telescopes to keep that from happening. Anybody else?
Do you see anything if you're not in that total path?
I'm sorry? So what you will
Will you see anything if you're not in the total path?
So if you're not in the path of totality, you will see all those partial phases that I talked about. So you'll see the moon with your eclipse glasses. You'll see the moon take a bite out of the sun, and it will cover more and more and more and more. And around these parts, it will actually cover about 99.5%. There was a website, oh gosh, I forgot to call it out. Where was it? It was all the way back at the beginning. I go all the way back here, and I realize I forgot to bring it up. My apologies. There it is. NSO.edu. NSO is the National Solar Observatory for Public Eclipse Map 2024. And that will actually give you like a Google map, and then you click on the map, and a little pop-up will show up, and it will tell you in local time when will the eclipse start, when is first contact, when is second contact, what will the duration be, when is third contact, and when will it all end. And that's the best way to find out for any, because it's going to be different. You know, any place I stick on the map, it's going to be a different time. But this website will tell you exactly what it's going to be. So maybe you find a park down here someplace, and you stick the pin in there, and it'll tell you exactly what it's going to be for that spot.
When will the next eclipse be so we can all make hotel reservations?
Oh, so the next eclipse, yeah. So it's not hotel reservations that you're going to need. It's going to be in, actually, if I go to, it's going to be 2045. Let's see if I could find it. It's this blue line here. So that's the next one. August 12th, 2045 is the next one in the US. So it's probably not a hotel room. Like, I'm going to be shopping for nursing homes that's inside that blue path.
Northern Texas.
Eat all of your vegetables. Have a really good healthcare plan.
Sorry. You said the last one was 2017?
Yes. Now, we had an annular one last year, but the last total one was 2017.
7 years ago.
Yes.
How come we had one in 6 years ago and then the next one's not going to be for
So you get,
12 years.
you get, so remember when I did that Earth basketball and Moon tennis ball, and I mentioned that the height of the, about 55, about 4.5 feet of variance. And of course, the basketball is only about 10-inch diameter. And so almost all the time the shadow misses, but maybe 20% of the time the shadow hits. But when it hits, it always hits in a different spot on the planet. And so you can sort of predict, now that you understand the pattern, you sort of predict where it's going to hit on the pattern on the planet. But these things show up in all these oddball places. So like, eclipse is going through here, and you have to ask yourself, or this eclipse going through Australia, right? Not a lot of roads in that part of Australia. So a lot of times eclipses happen in places that you can't get to them. All these eclipses that are over the ocean, I mean, I suppose you could get on a ship, but most of these things you tend to miss. So the odds of an eclipse, if you could just stick a pin on Earth and say, on average, how often will I get an eclipse on that particular spot? It's been a while since I saw the number. I want to say it's like on average once in every 385 years that you'll get an eclipse on one particular spot of the ground. So now there was this spot in Texas that had the 2017 eclipse coming this way, and I'd have to go back one slide, but this is the annular eclipse, but they also had it was in this part of the country here. It actually started in Oregon and ended up going out over, I think, South Carolina. And so there's a spot in the country right about here that's going to get 2 total solar eclipses only 7 years apart. But that's really unusual. So yeah, it happens though. Yeah, sure.
I'm very curious. What do you notice in nature when this happens? Like, what do birds and other animals
great question.
do?
So one of my colleagues is actually helping with a study on that. So the animals, and I actually, at the last eclipse presentation, one of the audience members had a relative that works at a zoo. And they said, oh yeah, the animals get very quiet. They go put themselves to bed. And then a couple minutes later, when the eclipse is over, they're all like excited. The temperature tends to drop rapidly, especially if you're in a dry desert climate. The temperature really tends to drop noticeably. Clouds may start to appear in the sky because of how fast the temperature is dropping. The insects get really, really quiet. So the science experiment that my friend is helping with, he has to put a special recording device out in a wilderness area. He's working with the equivalent of the DNR in Texas to find some state land where they can put this device and it will not be interrupted. You tend to get more insects if there's water nearby, so I'm sure he'll probably find a place that's got water. And they want it there for, I think it's 5 days before the eclipse starts. and they want it there for 5 days after the eclipse is over. And then what they want to do is establish what's the normal activity that we hear in terms of the noises and things like that. And then they listen for what the variance is, because even the insects all calm down. Yeah, everything is like, oh, it's nighttime now. And they start behaving like that. The birds stop chirping, they stop flying. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah, it's a really good question.
Well, they react with all their senses, and that's how they live. And so that's why I'm like, how do they deal with all of a sudden this drop in temperature that doesn't normally happen in the middle of the day?
Yeah.
That's gotta like freak them all out.
Yeah, I would think so, but they do tend to all get very quiet. And then they get noisy when it's over. Yep. Great question. Any others?
I kind of have a straight.
Oh, sure.
There's an ISO number on these glasses.
Yeah.
And I'm a photographer.
Okay.
So ISO 200 is you need not a lot of light, but this is a huge number.
Yeah, so it's not ISO in the way you're thinking of ISO. So ISO is International Standards Organization. So in the old days of photography, you would load your camera with film, and they used to call it DIN, and then they called it ASA, and now they call it ISO. Digital cameras technically don't use ISO. It's a little bit of a fake out because it's a holdover from the days when cameras used film. They technically use something called gain. But they represent the ISO controls to simulate what would happen if a photographer took 100 ISO 100 film, it used to be ASA 100, and they take that out and they put 400 speed film in, or 1,000 speed film, or 1,600 speed film.
It required less light the higher the number.
And yes, now on a digital camera, you don't take the sensor out and put in a more sensitive sensor. The sensor in the camera is the sensor in the camera. That doesn't change. What happens is the camera amplifies the amount of information it collected mathematically. And every time you take an image, you get some of the information is garbage information, it's noise, and some of it's the quality, the actual light that you care about. And so when you amplify everything. You amplify the noise and you amplify the data you care about. If you use a really low ISO and you just take a really long exposure, you're getting lots of the data you care about and you haven't amplified anything, so the noise stays really low. And when you crank up the ISO, you see a very noisy image. So you're not going to crank your camera up to this. What you would do as a photographer is you use software, Canon, Nikon, Sony, what do you use?
Nikon.
Nikon, okay. So there's something called Eclipse Orchestrator that can control Nikon cameras. And it will automate the eclipse capture. And what happens is they usually tell you to set one ISO and don't change it. So let's say it's ISO 200, I'm just making that up. And then you set the aperture, like f8, and you don't change that either. And the only thing that you change is the shutter speed. And during totality, when you're trying to get the solar corona, each shot that you take is twice as long as the last one. I think the longest exposure at ISO 100 would be about 4 seconds. And that's the one that actually gets the Earthshine on the moon. And then the one that's half as long as that, you won't see the Earthshine, but you'll see the corona going way out to the edge of the frame, but where the moon is will be completely blown out. It will look horrible. And then the one that's half as long and half as long and half as long, until you get one where the moon is nice and sharp, and you'll see lots of detail on the corona, but it'll only be really, really close to the moon. You won't see it all the way out to the corners of the frame. And then you have to have software that stacks all that together and makes the one really beautiful image. And that's how we do it. So you're literally taking a shot, changing exposure, taking a shot, changing exposure, which would be hopeless for you to try and do manually. And that's why you use the software and it automates it.
That's what you mentioned before, exactly.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, anybody else? All right, thank you for your time, I appreciate it.
Thank you for watching our presentation. In order to discover upcoming events at the library, please visit our website, westlandlibrary.org, and click on our events calendar for a full list of everything that we have. You can also visit our Facebook page at Westland Library for daily updates. Thank you for watching, and we hope to see you soon.